Oh, this is cool. I've used a platform like this before. I think, or maybe it was this one just under, maybe it was a different name. I don't remember, but this is more familiar than I thought it was going to be.
Well, we use this to academia a lot, and I know a lot of people use Zoom.
Yeah.
It's the same. I've kind of gotten used to this because we have to use it so much through COVID and all that mess. So we've kind of gotten accustomed. But man, I appreciate you being on here today. And this is an interesting story because I don't know how much you've listened to the podcast or what, but everything we've done with the podcast, we've tried to link back to horses.
Uh huh.
And it's really evolved in this really unique kind of a discussion because what we've had on here is people that are really what the focus for me has been. It's evolved so much from horses to life stories, interesting situations, events, whatever, in people's lives. And so our common link for people who are listening and don't know, Graham Ebner's on our podcast today. He's a custom bootmaker from Austin, Texas. And our common link is a young lady named Libby Hallett. And Libby, I understand y'all are pretty good friends. Libby and I go way back too. She's such a sweet, sweet girl. And she actually, I don't know if you know this, but she sent me a shirt.
She did, yeah. She did, yeah. She texted me the other day, said, "Hey, I want to grab a shirt for a friend of mine," and I went and I dropped it off, and then I was like, "Who's this for?" And she was like, "Oh, it's for Clay Cavender," and I was like, "Oh, okay." But I mean, I've heard her talk about you for here and there for years, and whenever you've like come into town and y'all have gotten together or whatever, and then when she told me about this, it kind of brought everything back full circle. So I was excited.
She brought you up. I was coming through Texas last December doing podcast trips, and I was swinging through Austin, and just happened to randomly. I thought, you know what, I need to see if she's in. I didn't think there was any chance that she would probably be available, and she was. So we got to catch up, and she said, "Hey, I got this friend of mine, Graham, that's a bootmaker that might be an interesting story for you." So. And then she also sent me a Libby and the Loveless T-shirt as well. So I got two T-shirts.
Oh yeah, that's a good one too. That one's designed by this guy named Taylor Rushing, who is definitely he's an artist and he's doing a whole bunch of stuff for musicians and whatnot. Definitely worth a look. But that shirt's great. I mean, man, anytime you ever get a chance to hear them play, if you're back in Austin at some point, they're fantastic. They're like a '90s country cover band and. Just to shine a little spotlight on Libby, she has like an incredible voice, the likes of which you don't often hear in the honky tonk scene. Like, there's a lot of great musicians here, but Libby has a truly like exceptional voice, and they put on a great show. There's always a million people dancing, and that's kind of what people are showing up there for, and it's a really good time.
Libby, back in a long time ago at College Station's where I met her, and she was playing the guitar some, and she was on my judging team, and we would talk about music. Of course, she had a knack for country music in general, whether it was Texas country or Oklahoma red dirt or pop kind of country. She kind of knew it all. And but when I came back to Texas this past year and she told me she was singing, that was a little bit of a surprise. I didn't know that she was up on the stage now. But you can actually find her if you're interested. I think she's on Apple Music maybe, and I know she's got some YouTube videos up, and she's recording too. Is that right? Do you know about this?
They are, yeah. I mean, definitely that's kind of a newer thing for them. But they have a fair sheet of originals now. Like I said, they started off doing like '90s country covers, like all the good stuff that at least I and all the band grew up on. So they've written a bunch of originals and they've been performing them for a long time. And so I think that they're in the studio doing some recording now. But best place to see them is kind of in their natural element for sure, which is like Samstown Point or the White Horse or Sagebrush or something like that in Austin. But yeah, they're fantastic. She just, during COVID, she wanted to learn to play the guitar, and she's always sang here and there, maybe choir or something like that. And she picked up the guitar, and one of her now bandmates helped her get going on it, and she just took off with it. And she has a great band that are all kind of at different stages in their music careers. Most of them are doing other things now, but they've all been on stage in Austin in the honky tonk scene for years in one way or another. So she's got a great support system.
She's a free spirit too. That's what I love about her most. She's a free spirit. Another
Yeah,
common link we
she's
have
one of a kind.
Another common link we have is someone that's actually been on the podcast before, Calvin Waters. He's a leather worker, saddle maker there around Temple and Troy, Texas. And I didn't know until you texted me the other day that y'all are linked to, or y'all, I guess, probably just as artists, you probably know each other, huh?
Yeah, it's probably a lot like the horse world where there's not there's not a lot of cowboy boot makers and there's not a lot of saddle makers. There's a fair amount of both, and everybody kind of has their own niche. But just through, I don't even remember how I met Calvin initially, but the shop that I started at, he came through one day and I got to meet him in person. Maybe we'd communicated on Instagram or something at first. But yeah, we keep in touch every once in a while, just over the internet. And it's been a while since I've seen him. We have this big boot and saddle makers trade show every year in Wichita Falls, Texas. First weekend of October. It's been happening since, God, I think like 1981 or 82 or something like that. Anyway, it's I would say mostly a boot show and trade show, but there's a big saddle component too. And so I don't know if Calvin's going to be there this year or not, but just, through things like that, it's been nice to meet folks like Calvin. And as someone who is not really a part of the horse world on a regular basis, it's fun for me to kind of like get to see what's kind of on the other side of that curtain and meet some folks who are making things for like working cowboys and folks that are really using this stuff for its original intended purpose, which is typically not my customer. So it's kind of fun for me to see all that.
Well, I think you're an interesting person to have on this, because while you may not be directly linked to the horse business, we typically wear cowboy boots, and I'm going to just throw this right out on the table, because we're going to discuss this a lot today, because it says it on your website is the frequently asked question about anything usually is, how much does it cost? And when I look your stuff up, I love nice stuff. Okay, I've got many custom pair of cowboy boots, and I thought, my wife especially thought, that I paid a lot for them. And then I looked at yours, and you are in a different category, buddy. Just so we put that right out there, that you say on your website in the range of $6,000 to $9,000, and you only do one pair a month, so it's a limited range of boots that you're producing. So this is what I really was interested in, and we're going to talk all about that, because some people are probably going, no way, Jose. But you're a busy guy. You got your own shop. So there's obviously a lot of people out there that want your artistry. And before we get into all that, though, I want to know who you are as far as a person, and what, if you weren't directly tied to the horse or livestock business as a kid or a young adult, what brought you to making cowboy boots, and to add to that, high-end quality cowboy boots?
Oh man, I could probably spend the entire time answering this question. But I guess a little more clarity on my background is I did grow up riding. My dad was somewhat into reining horses and kind of that world when I was young. Most of my childhood photos are like me on top of my paint, BJ, and sitting with my dad and that kind of thing. So, I was at least a part of it for most of my adolescence. Had a horse in college, and it was always kind of like, I don't know, maybe adjacent to it up until about that point. But I guess because of that, and just, I grew up in Texas. I'm from Katy, which is right outside of Houston. I wore cowboy boots. Like, people in my family wore cowboy boots, and we did, ride horses. But like, I am firmly from the suburbs. I grew up right next to the equestrian center in Katy, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. But I'm firmly from the suburbs. It's like, I could put a saddle on and I was a decent rider and stuff like that, but I'm far from an equestrian. But I always wore cowboy boots, and that was, my baby photos are, me in a stall and my hat and boots and that sort of thing. And I think, for me, like a lot of Texans, cowboy boots were, part of my uniform, I guess.
Texas uniform. Yeah,
for sure. And something that I love about that, and this might be getting a little bit ahead, is like, anybody can wear the uniform, and maybe some folks don't like that as much as others, but I kind of love when somebody moves to Texas and buys a hat and a pair of boots and really wears it with some pride. I'm especially glad because most of my customers are not working cowboys and folks on ranches and stuff like that. And they're interested in my work from an artistic or like style perspective, or maybe as collectors or something like that. But anyway, so yeah, I grew up in Katy. I was around horses and stuff like that. I went to A&M actually, and I have a horticulture degree from A&M. So we may have crossed paths at some point while I was there, but I grew up sewing and making clothes and like kind of quilting with my grandma, stuff like that. And I moved to Austin, 2015, I think. And so I've always been like a very DIY, kind of tear it apart, put it back together. How does it work kind of person. I love clothes. I've always had a shoe obsession, and those things just kind of crossed paths cosmically. And I had some boots that I wanted to learn how to fix, and was trying to figure out somebody to teach me how to do it. And I lucked out and found a shop that was nearby me to kind of show me the ropes a little bit. And after some back and forth, they let me come in and start an apprenticeship. And I can't really explain enough how lucky I was that all this stuff just kind of happened at the right time. I had enough time to pursue something like this in my free time with what I was doing for work at the time, which was like working at a coffee shop and a motorcycle shop. And, I was in my early mid 20s and just kind of enjoying living in Austin and, trying to learn some new things. And I was like, well, I love to sew and I love shoes. I love cowboy boots. Like I like to fix stuff. Like maybe I'll just give this a shot. And it just kind of went from there, honestly. And once I kind of like got into it and realized that not only was there opportunity for like, kind of carrying on this like long tradition of, handmade boots, but there was also like space within this craft for like artistic expression and really to like take it to whatever level you wanted it to be at. I got pretty hooked. So like at the beginning, and if I'm rambling here, stop me, but at the beginning it was like, I'm doing repair work and just kind of learning basics on how this stuff goes. And then as I get into it, I get a little more responsibility. I'm doing repair work on customers' boots. I'm, doing portions of new boots, and then I'm making new boots, then I'm making my own stuff. So it just kind of snowballed from there, from, a part-time unpaid apprenticeship for a while to a part-time job to a full-time job, and then eventually leaving and doing my own thing now.
And with that story, let's just recap just a tick. You grew up around reining horses. You hung out with your grandma, learned how to sew, went to A&M, got a horticulture degree. All of these, I have zero doubt you and Livy are friends now because this sounds just like someone that worked at a coffee shop.
Yeah,
I can see that totally, and I admire that too. That you guys just pick up whatever and you learn and you grow through just experiences in life. And so that's a neat way you got to where you are, is just kind of take things as they come and build upon experiences. And here you are falling into your own business and entrepreneurship. And I'm sure your professors at A&M would be surprised too that you got a horticulture degree and now you're a custom boot maker. So that's a different story.
I'm surprised about it most of the time. I really enjoyed my time there. I think I had some different expectations for how my life was going to go post college, or maybe I didn't have enough expectations, is probably the reality. But I enjoyed the horticulture program a lot. Had a lot of great professors, met a lot of good people, and ultimately have little to nothing to do with horticulture at this point in my life, aside from the one Monstera plant that I have hanging in my shop, which is not looking so good today, actually. But besides that, I've got a lot of fond memories of that time.
I want to make sure our listeners look you up on Instagram too, and I'll mention this at the end of the podcast, and I'll put it in the description as well. But your Instagram page has obviously pictures of your work. I would encourage everyone to go look at that because it's art. It really is. It's unique. It's artist created. and I think about I got a buddy in California named Pete Agalos who he loves this kind of stuff too. And he always wore high end boots. And I remember 20 years ago kind of razzing him about his high end boots. And he looked at me and he said, Clay, nothing's too good for cowboys. And I've always thought about that. And, yeah, okay, I get it. And cowboys do take pride in their saddles and boots.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, honestly, top to bottom, I don't know a ton of working cowboys, but the ones that I have been privileged to meet through boot making and whatnot, it's like, there's nobody that's going to turn their nose up at a really nice hat or sure, beautiful sterling buckle set or whatever it is. Just because they're going to get it dirty doesn't mean they're not proud of putting it on every morning.
In terms of time and technique that goes into this, I know this is going to be probably a long answer too, which is great. So feel free to expound as much as you want. What goes into this whole, in terms of time, labor, the skill set, what all goes into this? Because obviously it's worth its price. So give us some appreciation for that price tag as far as the...
Yeah, for sure. So some background on this is like my outlook on kind of what I wanted my practice to look like when I went out on my own was I had an idea of how I wanted to do things, how much time I wanted to spend on the front end, fitting a customer, spending time on the artwork, spending time cutting and sewing details, all of this stuff. And so my idea was I kind of have this plan for what I want, how I want to do this, and I just kind of need to find the customer that's willing to, or that's interested in kind of like participating in that world and interested in buying something like of this caliber. Basically, I need to find my people who are interested in participating in custom cowboy boots in the way that I want to make them. So I take a long time. So everything is custom from start to finish. So just the process typically goes, hey, Graham, I'm really interested in getting a pair of boots. You've been on my waiting list for a little while, which is a whole nother thing. But, let's say you're on deck. It's your turn. Okay, I want, I'll just take a pair that I've got sitting on the shelf right here. I want a pair of boots with Paul Bunyan.
Can you reach and grab them?
Yeah, hang on one second.
I saw these on your website. As soon as you said Paul Bunyan, I knew the boot you were talking about. I would like to know the story. When you're done explaining this, tell us the story behind Paul Bunyan too.
Okay, so for people who don't know, Paul Bunyan is kind of an American folk hero, lumberjack. And there are, he's kind of this larger than life figure, right? He's, depending on which tale you read, he's 100 feet tall or he's 1,000 feet tall, and his footprints in the mud created the Grand Canyon, and he uses a redwood tree as a toothpick or that kind of thing. He's just like this enormous figure, and his best friend and kind of partner is a giant blue ox named Babe. So I had a customer and a friend here in Austin, and she got on my list last year and said, so we started talking about what she wanted, and she said, yeah, I want Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox. And I get a lot of interesting requests, but this one was definitely pretty surprising. And I said, well, why? What's the deal? I mean, it sounds fun, but and she grew up in Northern California, in part where there's a statue, two enormous statues of Paul and Babe that are, I think the Paul statue is like 61 feet tall and Babe is 35 feet or something like that. And they're this like really incredible slice of old Americana. They were built in 61, I think, originally the statues were installed. And so as a kid, she would go to see these statues with her family. And part of the fun about this little installation on the roadside in the redwoods, is that there would be somebody inside Paul to greet the kids as they got out of their cars to come and kind of walk through the woods and go see the trees of mystery, which are these like really interesting redwood trees there on the side of the highway. So she's got, these photos and these great memories of herself as a child going to see all this stuff. And she wanted that I don't know, commemorated on a pair of boots. And she dances a lot, and so she wanted something she could show off, like something that would be kind of fun and loud when she's, you know, out dancing to Libby's band. And so that this kind of request is really fun for me. I like to draw. I like to do kind of like more goofy, non-traditional stuff. I like the traditional stuff like stitching and things as well, but this is really fun to me because I got to do this just like full-blown illustration of so like this one that I'm holding up. This is Paul. You know, he's standing there. He's got this big cross-cut saw kind of floating behind his head. And my friend that ordered these boots, her grandfather used to take old crosscut saws and like paint them and sell them at like county fairs and stuff like that as art, which I think is kind of a neat full circle thing to this. And then, you know, like on each back of the boot, you've got Paul on the front of this one, and you've got Babe on the back of this one. And just a couple other little details is there's some clouds kind of sitting up at the top of this mountain scene that's behind Paul and Babe, and they are chain stitch embroidered by some of my studio mates here at my shop, a company by the name of Fort Lonesome. They do like a kind of classic hand chain stitch embroidery and suiting and stuff like that. So they did a little embroidery for Paul Bunyan's chest hair, which is, you know, not going to translate so well audio wise, but if you look at the photos on the Instagram, you can see it there for a little 3D effect. So anyway, so she's like, hey, I want Paul Bunyan, I want Babe the Blue Ox. And I said, all right, cool. So every part of this process is going to be fit to you, right? So I've got an idea of what you want for artwork, and we're going to work that out first. I'm going to come up with an illustration or something kind of roughed in so that we're on the same page. Once we get the artwork figured out, whether it's an inlaid boot like this, or a classic boot with top stitching and, you know, some flowers or something like that, we'll get that ironed out, and then you come in and I'll measure your feet. So every pair that I make is custom and made to fit your exact foot. So I have a last that I designed, and then using the measurements that I take from your foot, I'll build that up, reduce it in certain areas, make it fit your foot exactly, so that this boot from the very beginning, like, it's going to require very little break-in, except for, you know, just kind of overcoming the stiffness of the sole leather. But from the beginning of the day to the end, like, it's going to fit your foot and your foot alone. So that's the most important thing. There's this I don't know, old shoemakers saying that the last shall be first, which is, you know, funny for a couple of reasons, but that's the most important part of this entire process, right? It's like, if I make a custom boot and I spend 500 hours on it and it's beautiful, but it doesn't fit you, then it's worthless. You know, it's just something for the shelf. And while I would be totally fine making boots for someone just to like put on their shelf, like, I want people to wear them if that's what they're here for. And they usually are. So I'll take your measurements, I'll build your last, I'll make the patterns based off of your leg and your foot measurements. And then typically I'll make a fitter. So I'll make kind of like a trial boot for you to try on, just to make sure that like everything that I think should work with your foot is actually going to work in reality. So you'll try that on. I'll, you know, go back to the last, reduce it here, add it there, whatever I need to do, just to make sure that I get the perfect fit for you. And then from there, it's like I start cutting and sewing. And so if I'm doing an inlaid piece, I've got all my artwork ironed out, then I'm like, you know, I'm kind of cutting all of my little jigsaw pieces and putting them together and sewing individual parts together to kind of make this collage of a big scene, like I've got with the Paul Bunyan boots here. So that could take, you know, up until that point, you know, it might take me a week, maybe a week to do, or maybe 2 weeks to do like artwork, and then measure you, build the last, and do the fitter. And all this just kind of depends on, like, you know, the artwork that I did for the Paul Bunyan boots. I think I spent a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks, just illustrating that and like kind of going back and forth. And the biggest thing with that is that I can draw something. I can draw an illustration of Paul Bunyan, but I have to make it so that I can sew it. Like every line, every shape of that design has to be able to be cut and sewn out of leather. So it's not like I can have, you know, little wispy lines that indicate some movement or whatever, or little hairs on Paul's chest or something like that. It's like every spot on that illustration has to be specifically thought out so that I can construct it from like individual flat pieces of leather. So I do the illustration, I kind of go back through and make sure that I kind of have this plan of attack, like how to put everything together, do the last, do the fitter. You try that on, fitter feels good, cool. Now I'm kind of like off to the races and I can start cutting and sewing. So typically from this point, it takes me about 3 weeks for something simple. Like I've got another pair right here, and this is like a peewee pair, and they have a very small amount of inlay on them, but overall like a pretty simple boot. So for something like that, or something that just has like top stitching or something that's not a crazy inlaid scene, it'll take me about 3 weeks to cut and sew and get it ready to go. If it's something like this, with full inlay, like these Paul Bunyans, or another one that I did, which is this is a scene from Santa Elena Canyon in Big Bend National Park, and you've got some prickly pear cactus, and you've got armadillos, and you've got some UFO guys hanging up here in the sky, and kind of a little bit of a change of pace here on the backside of the boot where the UFO comes down and zaps the armadillo, and the prickly pears turn into magic mushrooms, and it's really just kind of like
these boots tell a whole story. It's not just a pair of boots; it's a story.
Yeah, exactly. I like that movement. I feel like a lot of custom cowboy boots end up looking like somebody designed them with like Microsoft Paint or clip art or something like that. It's just like a blue pair with a cactus stuck on one side and an armadillo stuck on the other. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just not really how I want to approach it. I want to kind of like make a piece of art, like do an illustration, and then make that into something that someone can wear. So
you can't
something
wear
like
your
one of
pants
these
over these boots, though, right? Like you have to tuck your pants in. If you're spending that much time and money on that, you're spending time, they're spending money. I want people to see Paul Bunyan if I am wearing them boots, right?
Some people, but you might be surprised. I think it typically depends on. I mean, it really just depends on the person's personality. I mean, like I would wear a totally crazy inlaid pair, and I would wear my jeans over them all the time, because I like that moment when you like sit down at the bar stool or at the restaurant or whatever, and you cross your legs and your jeans hike up just a little bit, and there's like a little peak of some magic mushrooms and an armadillo on the bottom of that guy's boots. Like, what is going on with that? It's kind of like there's a bootmaker named Lisa Sorrell who is kind of a titan in our world, a phenomenal bootmaker, and she's been doing it for a long time. And she says that cowboy boots can be kind of like lingerie. If you want people to see it, you can show it off. Otherwise, it's just for you, but it's there and you feel good about wearing it. So I like to kind of think about it like that.
That's a great thought. I like that. Just so many times I've got a pair of boots that were made by Mercedes, Terrell. And the tops, they're just a regular pair of, I think they're elk maybe, but they're just chocolate brown. But the tops of them are metallic blue.
Okay.
Yeah, I was judging on the show last weekend in Utah when you nailed it. When I crossed my legs sitting down, my scribe was looking. She's like, "Wow, but you got metallic blue tops on your boots."
Yeah, I love that moment. I made a pair recently, kind of for that moment, and I don't have the pattern sitting here next to me, but basically it's like they have top stitching on there, the traditional fancy stitching, but down at the bottom of the front and back panels by your ankle, there's inlaid like 3-dimensional flowers. And a lot of times you see that kind of thing up at the very top of the boot, just for whatever reason. And I thought about it, and I was like, man, I really want, this guy's name was Nick. I want Nick to be able to sit down, because he's not going to shotgun his pants. I want him to sit down at the bar or wherever and cross his legs. And I want him to have this moment where somebody sees it across the room and it's like, what is that sticking out on that guy's boot, Because normally it's like, this happens and you see a little bit of stitching or something. But I wanted people to see this like pop of color or something interesting, so that he could still kind of get that feeling of showing them off without having to tuck his pants in.
The reaction.
Yeah.
So much care and time and thought goes into the top of the boot. You didn't even show us the bottom. You just talked about the top. So what do you think about the bottom? Is that just is utilitarian purpose, and so you put more of a thought into longevity, or do some people care more about the vamp or what?
Well, I think most people care. Most folks in the custom cowboy boot world, including the wearers themselves, prioritize the tops more than anything, which is understandable. Like that's the star of the show. But for me, like when I started doing this, some of my first jobs in the shop were doing repair work, like soles and heels, replacing basically doing bottoming, right? So anything from your ankle down, that's what I was working on, whether it was repair or new boots or whatever. And I did that for a long time, and I kind of found that, initially I thought, okay, there's not as much room for like care or expression in the bottom of a boot. Like this is going to get beat up, it's going to get dirty. People really just care about the tops. Like that's the star. But just kind of as I went, I started to see that like really at every step along the way in making a pair of boots, like there is opportunity to take it to the next level. So the people that I really look up to, especially as far as bottoming and finishing, and by that I mean like kind of doing the final ink and dye and polish on the edge of the sole and the heel. The people that I look up to when I'm thinking about that kind of work are like traditional English shoemakers, like folks that are like on the West End making traditional men's and women's shoes, like Oxfords and derbies and that kind of thing. And they don't have boot tops to focus on, right? Like the entirety of their practice in making that shoe is focused on what people see, which is, from the ankle down. It's just the shoe itself, right? So like every moment that they're working on the heel or the breast of the heel, or that they're sewing the sole or doing edge finishing on the sole, or they're welting or sewing details on top of the vamps or whatever it is, like all of their time and care is going into that. So at the beginning, like that's all I was doing. And so I kind of developed this practice of, wow, I'm going to take, instead of like just cutting this straight, I'm going to cut a step in like the English guys do, or I'm going to use a little bit of a different burnishing iron to get an extra little rib or detail or something like that on the edge of my sole. Anything that I could do, not to like make it flashier, but just to make it nicer, to show people that there was extra time and care that went into this part of the process, whereas maybe normally there wouldn't be. And I guess that's kind of honestly like the theme of my boots in general, is like I really just I don't want to do anything for the sake of it just being an extra step. Like I'm not trying to waste my time, but I want to make stuff as nice as I possibly can. Like I want to excel in my finishing or my bottoming work, or I want to improve on my stitching on toe flowers or my toe box shape or stuff like that. Like I want people to see that, like, yes, I charge a lot of money, and I understand that. And I'll stand behind my prices because I know the hours that I spend in a pair of boots. Like just for example, and this kind of goes back to your earlier question, like this pair of Paul Bunyan boots, I think I probably have like somewhere around 250 hours in those. So, but I'll stand behind every one of those hours. There was a reason that I spent that much time on it, and I'm not slow. I'm a fairly proficient maker. There's a lot of people who make 2 or 3 pairs in a week, and we just have different approaches. But for me, I wanted to take as long as I possibly could so that I could take every extra step to increase the quality of my work, and I just decided to try and find the customers who were willing to pay for that. And I've been really lucky that I've done that so far.
Evidently, you have a waiting list.
Yeah, it's working. Right. Whatever. I mean, it's I'm gonna keep at it because it's people are excited about it, and that feeds back into it. It makes me excited about the work that I'm doing. There's always pairs that I enjoy making more than others, or aspects of the process that I enjoy more than other aspects, but. It's like when somebody leaves here with a $8,000 pair of boots, I don't want them to look at that boot and see like a lot of care and time and effort that went into the tops, and then look at the bottoms and flip them over and see a bunch of like wayward dye and ink that wasn't cleaned up, or see stitches missed here and there. Like I want these like indicators of quality to show from the top to the bottom as best as I can. And so I'll take just as much time, at least in my mind or in theory, on the bottoming work from like attaching the vamps to sewing the toe flower to stitching the welt, all of these things. Like there's no process for me of making, there's no part of the process of making this boot that is more important than another. Like all of it needs to have the same amount of care.
So when you've done all this and then you call the customer and tell them to come get their boots, how fun is it to see their reaction and experience that when they walk in the door?
Oh, it's terrifying. It is maybe my least favorite part of the whole process.
Really?
Yeah, because it's like, I've got this thing that I've spent, a month and a half of my life on, and I'm really excited about it. And maybe I feel great about every part of it, or maybe there's something that I feel like I could have done better on or whatever. And this person walks in and they're just purely excited, and they look at it, they're like, yeah, this looks great. And I can look at the boot and say, yeah, this looks really good. I'm really happy with the work that I did. But the only part that matters is when that person sits down and pulls the boot onto their foot. And so like all of my anxiety, every bit of it that I can possibly muster, comes up to the front of the room right there at that moment when that person grabs the pull straps and tries to shove their foot into it. And I'm just hoping for that little pop, when their heel just gets past the pass line and flops into the bottom of the boot. And I look at their face and they're like, oh yeah, that's what I wanted. Like that moment right there. That's the point of all of it. Because honestly, that's the hardest part. Like I can make an inlaid boot, I can do stitching, and you can teach that stuff, but fitting someone's foot or fitting the idea that someone has of what something should feel like on their foot, that is the absolute hardest part of this entire thing. So seeing...
Have you ever experienced have you ever had a bad experience?
Yes.
In that?
Yeah, for sure. And I think any maker that says they've never had a misfit either they're dishonest or they have dishonest customers, because it will happen. Like I have a lot of great fits, and I have a few pairs that I've fit someone too tight, and then a few months later they say, hey, these are actually kind of snug. Can we stretch them out here or there? Or can we pull them in right here, or whatever the case may be? And that's just the reality of this. Like I make a fitter to avoid most of that, but every once in a while, it's got to come out a little bit more, because now it's summertime and their feet swell a little more than they did when I initially made the boots, or something like that. Or maybe they changed the kind of socks that they like to wear, so now they fit a little too snug because they're wearing a winter sock or whatever it is. But kind of my stance on that is like, I'm going to do my absolute best. I'm not, I may not get it perfect every single time on the first time, but I will always get it right. And I'm going to stand behind whatever I make until the person is happy, whether that means making a new pair or some light modifications to stretching it in, one area or another. Whatever it is, like they're going to be happy with them at the end of the day.
What's the most interesting experience that you had in that situation with a customer, or feedback that you got that was, I guess you can say positive or negative, but is there any moment that sticks out in your mind that gave you a sense of accomplishment, or maybe the opposite? I don't know, but any customers stick out, like experiences with them more genuine, more real than the others?
I don't really feel like I can highlight one over any of the rest of them. I've been like, I at this point, I'm only making like 6 to 8 pairs a year. And so I don't interact with a ton of people that are ordering my boots. Like I have a long waiting list, if you want to call it that, but kind of the way that it works for me is how I have done it so far is like, I opened my books up like last October, I think. And I said, okay, kind of here's how it works. Here's the sign up form. Here's all the information that you need. If you're still serious about this, send me your information. I'll put you on the list. And then kind of like once my time frame closes, I'll start going through those submissions, kind of making sure that we're on the same page and reaching out to the first 6 to 8 people that signed up. So yeah, the reality is like, I'm not dealing with 100 customers a year. Like I have 6 to 8 people that I talk with a lot from the beginning to the end. We're talking about design, we're talking about expectations, how they're going to wear them, what kind of colors they normally wear, what they're going to wear the boots with, have they worn cowboy boots before, that kind of thing. And I have one customer, and I haven't made his stuff yet, but he's never worn cowboy boots ever. Like he's never even owned a pair before.
The first pair of cowboy boots he has are going to be your boots.
Oh my, yeah. And I am simultaneously like terrified and really excited for that, for that opportunity. But, So it's like I want to get to know these people, you know, like they're not just a customer that comes in and buys something from me. You know, they're not walking in and said, "Hey, I need a size 32 belt and I'd like it to be brown," and then I make that and they leave. Like I'm making something that is going to be hopefully a part of their lives for a really long time, and hopefully get passed down to their kids or other family members, or you know, maybe somebody will be buried with them. I have no idea, but it's not this like kind of cut and dry interaction. So I kind of like to think that I only make boots for my friends at this point, because like everybody that is on the list and everyone that's getting a pair of boots, like we talk a lot, you know, and I'm getting to know them, which is kind of the point of this, and something, a big part of this process that I really enjoy, because I get to meet a whole bunch of different kinds of people, you know, like one guy is a production welder at a shop here in town that does some like home building stuff. And I've got guys who are in finance or a lawyer, or I've got a woman who's a dancer and a dance instructor, and then another woman who's like a landscape designer and architect. And so it's like I have a lot of different kinds of people that come through here, and they're all great. And
Any famous people?
Yeah, maybe, but
Maybe you can't say names.
yeah,
I don't know if you can or not. But
I don't have like a big list of famous people. No, I'm still pretty green in this. I have maybe a couple of people of interest that, but nobody whose name I want to say.
right, sure.
But even then, like I'm not concealing anything. It's not a big deal. So, it means a lot more to me. Like I'm grateful to make boots for anyone who took the time to like find me and go through the process that I make people go through to get to this point. Because I understand that I kind of don't make it that easy, which is intentional. But I'm really grateful when kind of, frankly, just like, you know, normal folks are like, wow, I want something really nice and I want to spend, you know, whatever, $5,000 or $6,000 on this pair of boots. And like the guy that I'm talking about, that's a welder and kind of runs this like welding machine shop. Every time I see him, he's wearing them, and he rides his motorcycle in them, and he lives in these things. And maybe he's my favorite customer actually, because he wears the hell out of these things, and I don't expect people to do that, but I do love when it happens.
You know, you made me think of something. I'm a knife guy. I love knives.
Okay.
And I've had, I don't know, 4 or 5 custom made knives by 2 guys. One of them's there in Texas. They're art. And
yeah,
when it comes to this point, I don't want to cut corners. If I want this, I want it done the right way. And so they've produced these really nice knives, one of which I did not use. It was just too nice. I couldn't bring myself to use it. The other maker, I put it in my pocket and it's an everyday carry. And when he found out that I was using it in the barn and cutting hay strings and wearing it to class, whatever I'm doing, I could see it in his eyes. It was like, that's what I want my work doing. I want my stuff out there doing what it was intended to do.
Yeah, it feels good. It feels good to, like, you know, something can look nice and it can look nice on the shelf, but like putting it to work is a whole another thing. And like kind of in that vein, like with cowboy boots, it's the same thing. There's a huge spectrum of approaches to making a pair of cowboy boots, and it's like, you know, you have folks whose customers are working cowboys and ranchers, and folks that are like relying on their boots as a tool for their everyday life and their job and their responsibilities and stuff, and they have specific requirements for what those boots need to be able to handle. Maybe they're spending 12 hours a day in a saddle, and they're going to rub the inside leg of these tall tops, rub them raw and rub them off on their saddles or something like that, you know. Maybe they're spending a lot of time on their motorcycle and they need rubber soles. Maybe they spend a little bit of time at the ranch, but they spend a lot of time in the office, so they could kind of go either way, maybe lean a little bit more towards like an exotic leather. And then you have kind of the majority of my customers, which who are not working on a ranch, and maybe they want to wear their boots a lot, but like they're kind of wearing them as an everyday piece of footwear for the most part. Some folks, like the guy I was talking about a minute ago, maybe riding his motorcycle and kind of putting him through the test a little bit more. But there's like,
I ride motorcycles too, and that guy's got a spot on the toe of his left boot from shifting gears, unless he's got a heel toe shifter. But I
He does
can't
have a
imagine
foot
taking
clutch.
those.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I can't imagine rubbing a spot on the top of my boot like that and shifting. But
I know I mean, I ride as well, and I have a foot clutch on my bike, but my boot kind of rubs up against the clutch bracket, and so I have a nice little shiny spot on the suede of my black boots that I wear most of the time from that.
I guess that's a sign of who you are too.
Yeah, yeah,
What do you
um,
think that, because with every art, with everything, not just boots, but knife making or horse riding or whatever, there's always innovation and trends that are changing and evolving and becoming different. So, how do you balance being traditional, but also innovative and, for lack of better terms, with the times?
this is something that's really important to me actually because I would say, as far as the actual construction of my boots, it is identical to how it has been done for 150 years. Or what is this, 2024? Yeah, it's pretty close. Like I'm doing it in the same way that it has always been done, and I am like kind of following the tenets of traditional footwear, traditional hand footwear making, which is to say, like leather insole, a hand cut hold fast for the welt. I'm using a heavy leather counter stiffener and leather toe box and leather soles and all this stuff. I use a rubber heel cap, but for the most part, everything else is made in the same way that it's always been made. So for me, the technology or innovation or whatever comes in kind of how I get to that point. So I do a lot of design work with Adobe Illustrator or Procreate on my iPad, and I use these as tools for me to be more precise in my design work, but also replicable, I guess. Like if I'm designing a new tongue pattern or a counter cover or a stitch pattern that I plan to use multiple times, I'll use a piece of the software, and it helps me be more accurate. It helps me to be able to like size up and down, and I can reuse this pattern on different boots, of different sizes, that kind of thing. And I find it to be, I'm not going to say faster, but at least just for me, it kind of affords me some flexibility and seems to give me some more space to like be more creative without having to worry about like, okay, the stitch pattern that I just drew on paper, I want it to fit 6 rows of stitching. If I'm doing this by hand, I can either eyeball it and look at it with experience and know that like, okay, this pattern will hold 6 rows, or I can sketch out 5 little rows next to the first one and hope that it's going to fit, or I can design this pattern in Illustrator. I'm still designing it, I'm still drawing it, and now I can use a couple of tools within that software to predict where the next 5 rows are going to land, and I can know without the shadow of a doubt that this is going to fit 6 rows of stitching. And now I can modify it to fit 8 rows or 10 rows or 4 rows or whatever I want to do, right? So for me, like that makes my work better. Once I start stitching, it's still just me and a sewing machine stitching 1 row at a time, just like it's always been done. There's no difference. And kind of the same thing with like doing inlay work and things like that. I use some old techniques, like I use an old sewing machine that has a needle that's kind of been turned into a little chisel. It's like almost like a bandsaw, just like hops up and down, and it helps me like cut very accurate cuts through multiple layers of material so that I can make 2 identical front panels on a pair of boots. That's something that's been done for a long time. But I do my design work on the computer, and then I print my top patterns, and I can print, and reprint, so I have multiple copies. I don't have to go photocopy it or use carbon paper or whatever. And if I need to move, let's just say I did an armadillo and a cactus. Well, I drew this by hand. I have 1 pattern. Oh man, I should have moved that armadillo over just a little bit. Well, now I go over here and I move it and I reprint it, and I'm back to my table and I'm cutting and sewing with a lot more efficiency. So for me, I guess the theology behind this is I'm open to anything, like any kind of technology, any new technique, any of that stuff, if it helps me to do my work better. I don't think that a top stitching machine will allow me to make a nicer pair of boots because for the most part, I can stitch a better pair of tops than this machine that's making a factory boot, right? 1 row at a time. I can land every point where I want it to. It's going to be nicer. For the most part, there are some very nice top stitching machines nowadays, but or like I don't know, like an inseaming machine that attaches the welt, which is that like top layer of leather that you see that borders your foot on a pair of boots that the sole is sewn to. There's a machine that'll attach that to the insole of the boot, right? And it'll do it in 12 seconds or something like that. I can walk up there, hold the boot without welt, zip it around, and then I'm done. If I do that by hand, it takes me 45 minutes per boot. But it's a lot nicer. Like, it's going to hold up a lot longer. The stitches are going to be tighter. Like, it is a better quality product. So using that technology in that instance, like, that's not going to help me make something nicer or better or something that's going to last longer. So that's kind of my outlook on it. I have a couple of other things that I would like to implement, like maybe a laser cutter, which is not a new thing, and there's a few makers that are using things like that to cut inlay. And that's like pretty widely used in the leather industry at this point, from bags to footwear and everything in between. 3D scanning for feet, for building lasts, 3D printing for lasts, those sort of technologies I think will be a lot bigger for smaller makers in the years to come. It's already happening. There are already people using those things to measure people's feet and build lasts that are I don't know, changeable into different heel heights and toe shapes and stuff like that. But for small individual makers, they're just not really practical at this point. But once they are, like, I would definitely use something like that. I'm not the kind of maker, like, I'm not the guy at the Renaissance Fair who is like, I don't know, kind of falling on my sword to make things in exactly the same way as they've always been made, only for the sake of tradition. Like, I want to, like, my goal is not necessarily to do it exactly the same way or follow the exact same process as a bootmaker in Kansas did in 1890. I want to make the best possible thing that I can make, and I'll kind of use whatever I need to use to make that final product.
I think it's a great answer, because what you just described is something that I think we struggle with in many forms and facets. Horse training is another one. Is this balance between traditionalism and modernism, as far as, but what it really boils down to is being open-minded.
Yeah, exactly.
There can be a better way. We won't have to do it the old way,
Right. But maybe
everything we do should be evolving. It should be, I
yeah.
think, anyway.
And like, sometimes the old way is better. Sometimes the old way is still the way because it's the best way, right? And sometimes that's not true. Like, I don't know, our modern cements and glues are so much better than they were 10 or 15 years ago, right? And way better than using like potato-based or starch cement or whatever they were using way back. And I have to give credit to Lee Miller, the guy that I worked for at Texas Traditions for a while. He's really good about this, and I don't find this to be the case in a lot of makers in the cowboy boot world. A lot of them want to stick with the traditional methods because this is how it's always been done, and that is the reason they continue to do it that way, right? And sometimes that's okay, but Lee and some other folks in our community have always been really good about like adopting something new, some new technique or new approach to something, if it allowed them to make a better final product, because they were open-minded. And I think that's kind of the thing that I see. That's something that I see in like younger makers like myself more often, and something that kind of makes me excited for the future of cowboy boot making or shoemaking or whatever, craft in general, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer to that. And kind of to wrap us up here, kind of our closing thoughts. You've said a lot of this, but if you can maybe just kind of hit on it one more time, is, we're all leaving some kind of impact and mark on the world, or community, families, whoever it may be. What legacy or impact do you hope to leave through the work that you're doing?
I mean, maybe the thing that is most apparent is I want every pair of my boots that somebody sees to be exceptional, and for them to, I don't know, share in this like sense of pride that I have for them when they hold them and look at them. Like, I want the quality to be apparent. But maybe more so than that, like, I love being a bootmaker. I love making cowboy boots, but the community that I am a part of because of that, like the friends that I've made over the years, and connections, whatever, the events that I go to, through that, like meeting these people through the cowboy bootmaking community, like that has been such an enormous part of my life in the last however many 8 years. And I think that I more than anything want to leave like kind of like a lasting impact on that. Like I want to be remembered as somebody that people can call and ask questions about whatever they're working on, you know. Like I want to be remembered as like someone who showed up to the bootmakers gathering and was a good hang and was open to talking about techniques and didn't hide things and was helpful to the next generation of bootmakers, things like that. Like just to spotlight Lisa Sorrell again, when I first got started making cowboy boots, there was not a lot of modern information about it on the internet. There was a lot of old footwear manufacturing books that you could find, and there was one forum that was already by this point pretty decrepit, with some kind of like older generation boot and shoe makers from around the world. But for the most part, there wasn't a lot of good information. And so for me, trying to learn was really difficult before I found this apprenticeship. And one of the resources that I had was Lisa's YouTube series. And if you've ever made a reel or a short film or whatever, like, you know, that even the smallest, seemingly an insignificant thing that you make takes so much time and effort. And Lisa had this humongous library of videos that could be anything from like, here's me and my kids hanging out in the shop today, or here's some funny things that happened with a customer. Oh, here's how to cut heavy counters and how to crimp vamps, you know? And so for me, like finding that information, and also that information coming from someone whose work you really respect, was a huge thing. And I know how much time that takes, especially now, to do something like that, and to, I don't know, do something that isn't directly going to impact your bank account. You know, you're really just doing it for like the good of the community and for people who are trying to learn. Like, I think that's a really incredible and selfless thing. Not that you don't get eyeballs on your work because of it, but it's still like, it's a really cool thing to do. So, I don't know. I think I hope to leave some sort of a legacy like that, where I was more than just a good bootmaker to people, that I was like a part of the community and somebody that people respected, in addition to respecting their work.
I think when you have that perspective, you're headed for success in many facets of life, because that's what we're here for, is to try to help each other. And I mean, it sounds simple, but being kind can go a long way. I understand.
Yeah.
I understand why you and Libby are buddies. When we started this, that's what we had in common. But through this discussion, I feel like I got a new friend.
Yeah.
I think you're doing a great job. Austin, I lived in College Station for years and years. We have a different perspective of Austin when we don't live there. But if there's people like you and Libby there, I'll come hang out anytime.
Yeah,
I appreciate
I've
you.
made that transition too.
Yeah. Well, you were talking about Katie earlier. If you grew up next to the Great Southwestern, then that place has changed dramatically the past 20, 25 years. It's just, it's crazy. So Texas in general is growing leaps and bounds. I don't want to take all your day. I really appreciate you doing this. Libby nailed it when she said, hey, you got to meet somebody I think would be interesting. What a unique story you have, a great product you're creating. And through that part, in the end, you're changing lives by being kind and helping people along the way. So you're encompassing everything that we have talked about on this podcast. So you're definitely a star in the lineage of the podcast. So thank you for doing that. And hopefully our paths will cross again soon. I'd love to stop by the shop. Here's what I really want. I can afford the T-shirt. I want to afford the boots. You got me. So maybe we can talk later about how to make really unique pair of boots. I don't know if Paul Bunyan would be my fit, but we'll come up with something.
Oh, we can do anything. Yeah, that sounds good, Clay. Yeah, man, thank you for having me. This is really cool. I've been looking forward to it, and Libby had a lot of great things to say about you too, and I feel like I can vouch for all of them now. So thanks again for having me on.
Great. Glad to have you.